Good evening. See how we did? See, Beth Adamers, how well behaved we are. I tell them they get quiet really well, and now they can see when we have a community event, it takes a little longer. That was actually really good. Good evening, everybody. It's really nice to have you here. I'm Rabbi Lauren Werber. I'm the rabbi at Congregation Beth Adam. And we're so excited for this whole series and so glad that we can host Rabbi Jun this evening. A couple people asked me about being a humanistic congregation, so I'm going to take under a minute to tell you a little bit about our sanctuary and what's a little bit different and what you might notice and be wondering about, but really, really quickly. So as a humanistic congregation, we do a whole lot of things the same as everybody else and some things different. We focus on our accountability to ourselves. We have language that's open to the possibility of belief in God or to a choice not to believe, and it's very wide open for all people to determine where they fit. And our sanctuary reflects that. Somebody noticed the ark being off-center, so we keep the Torah in the ark like everybody does. It's off-center because it's a part of the authority, but not the only authority and not the only story that we live by in a humanistic congregation. The other thing, if it was brighter, you'd notice our really beautiful windows that tell the story of the miracle of creation, but through the science of the Big Bang, coming out from the middle and out around. And I could tell you other stuff, but I don't want to center on us. I just know there were some questions, so it was a good way to give you just a taste of why our space looks the way it looks. Tonight we have Rabbi Ari Jun speaking about moral injury as it relates to Israel. If you don't know the term, you'll know it very well very shortly. If you do, either way, you'll get a chance to grapple with what it means for you. I don't want to spend a long time on introductions either, but Rabbi Jun, as most of you know, is now the rabbi at Temple Shalom after doing community relations work with the JCRC. And he and I have had the pleasure of really getting to know each other through some interfaith work as well as some advocacy efforts. And I've learned quite a bit from you, and I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more from you this evening. So here is Rabbi Jun.
The feeling of admiration is mutual. Since Rabbi Werber rejoined Cincinnati's Jewish community, is it 16 months ago?
I don't know, something like that.
If the maths, it's 16 months ago. She has very quickly emerged, in my mind, as one of our leading rabbis. And I actually have been giving her credit. You can tell me if I've been giving you credit that you do or don't deserve, but I have been assigning it to you in each case, which is that one of the uncommon features of this Z-Word series, the fact that none of the rabbis of congregations are speaking at their own pulpits, but instead we have this pulpit exchange. I have been telling people it was your idea, Rabbi Werber. Okay, so I'll continue telling people that it was her idea. One of the goals with this program was that we would engage a wide cross-section of our community in these crucial conversations. And one of the ways that I believe Rabbi Werber suggested we could help to encourage folks not just to go to one session, but at least perhaps to two sessions, was that none of the rabbis would speak in their own sanctuaries, but instead speak at the other congregations during the series. And since Rabbi Werber, in my mind, has emerged as such a leader of our community and a good friend, I'm really quite honored to be able to be here speaking at Beth Adam. So let me go ahead and get us started for the evening. I am worried I'm going to do something that I always do, which is I look at my slides and I say, there's no way this could possibly fill up enough time, and then I inevitably run over. So allow me to try to prevent myself from doing that and just go ahead and help us start the conversation. As Rabbi Werber mentioned, there is this concept called moral injury, and we're going to talk actually about it itself just a little bit, but more broadly, we're going to talk about what the implications of this idea are for what it means to be a Chovev Yisrael, somebody who loves Israel. In my case, I might frame that as someone who's a Zionist and believes in the preservation and security and the future of the Jewish people in Israel. And we'll talk about how we define these different things. That's where we're actually going to get started. But as Rabbi Werber mentioned, I'm Rabbi Ari Jun, for those of you whom I may not have had a chance to meet. I am the senior rabbi at Temple Sholem in Cincinnati. Before being at Temple Sholem, I was the director of Cincinnati's Jewish Community Relations Council. And, well, I've had all sorts of fun roles and things since before then. But that's enough recent memory of who I am. Let me tell you about what we're going to try to do tonight. I have broken this discussion up into three main sections that should help us go ahead and build a structure, a foundation for a conversation, help us to deal with the thorniest pieces of that conversation, and I absolutely welcome the thorniness of this discussion. We are going to ideally get into some of the difficulties of what it means to be a person who has a relationship with Israel, in, I assume, many or most of our cases, as an American Jew, who is in relationship with Israel during a time when it's, I think it's safe to say, it's not especially easy to be in relationship with Israel. And then I'm going to make some proposals you see moving forward. I'm going to give what I think of as some key pointers for how we do this work best and how we hang on to our discomfort and try to build toward whatever the better thing is that might be out in the future. So that's the plan. There will be a lot of opportunity to engage and discuss as this program goes on. We'll have some time for, Q&A at the end, of course, and I think there's some note cards that are going to be passed out so people can write down questions. But also there will be time for y'all to interact with those near you, and you could choose to talk to just those you know, or you could make some new friends. However, this isn't middle school. I don't have to tell you how to have your conversations. There will also be using some technology, though, to allow everyone to submit answers to certain questions. And I wish I could say I thought about this in advance, but I didn't. One of the benefits of this technology that I realized, where's our camera? For anyone who is streaming online, you actually can participate in this conversation from wherever you are using your cell phone, and your answers will become part of the discussion. So again, I didn't plan it that way. It was an after-the-fact realization, but it's a lovely perk. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started in the way that I am just always most inclined to get a conversation started, which is we're Jews. Jews do text. So let's do text. I actually alluded to this particular text, which you'll see in a second, during last week's session, where we had to very quickly reconfigure our plans because Rabbi Kopnick was sick, and so we had an impromptu panel. And I wish I could remember what the question was I included this text in an answer to. But this is a text that is on my mind a lot as I think about issues related to Israel and diaspora communities, of which the American Jewish community is one, the way in which diaspora communities do or don't relate with Israel. So I'm going to put this text up on the screen. I am not going to editorialize about it because that's what I want y'all to do. And what I want to do is I want to provide you with, let's say, 2 to 3 minutes to read the text, with whoever is next to you and you feel like talking to, and process what it means to you. Is there anything in the text that strikes you most? Anything you love? Anything you hate? And then we'll take a few answers from the group about things that people feel real strongly was a great takeaway that they had. So without any editorializing about the text itself, let me introduce you to Mishnah Ketubot 13:11. So this is from about the year 200 of the Common Era. And the only thing to know about how to read the text, of course, we have the Hebrew on the right, but on the left we have the English. The bolded English is a relatively literal translation of the words in the Hebrew, the original. And the unbolded English are Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz's explanation. So those are the extra words that make it make sense, if you will. With that, take a couple of minutes and read through the text and see what it means to you. I'm stunned by the silence. I hope this erupts into a din of discussion. I'm going to say take another 60 seconds. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and invite, let's say 3 people. So 3 people to share an insight that their groups came up with. If you could, if you could raise your hand and I'll call on you, if you could share your name, because I imagine I know we have folks here who don't all know one another. And then I'm going to repeat the comment because I suspect the people online won't hear it if it's not said into the microphone. Rabbis can be taught about technology, it appears. Yes?
I was just raising my hand. I am very upset with your interpretation of those words.
Oh, not Rabbi Steinsaltz.
Okay.
Blame him.
May and force together, they're almost opposite meanings. May, next year we go to be in Jerusalem, next year, and Passover, you don't say may we force people to go to Jerusalem.
So-
It knocks the war on, may and force.
So the comment was that in this editorialization from Rabbi Aidan Steinsaltz, not from me, this both a soft, squishy word and a rigid word, may and force being side by side, which seems to be a contradiction. This idea that, well, is it that they force or that they don't force? All right, let's get another comment. Do we have a second person who'd like to share?
This is more a question than a share. I'm Janet Travis. What is the Hebrew word, and what is the root of the word, what the translation is of force?
The word force is not in the Hebrew, it is implied by the verb in the Hebrew, but I will tell you, interestingly enough, the word that is the ascent to Eretz Yisrael is ma'alin. If you know the word for aliyah, it is the same root, it's the same concept. But the force isn't in there. This is the subtext, if you will.
So is it even as strong as coerce? Aliyah means to go up, so that's not indicating force at all.
It's subtext. There's not. You're correct to note that the Hebrew itself does not explicitly say it. I wondered if you might say that.
Which has a positive force, not a positive meaning.
Could you repeat that?
I'll repeat it into the mic after you finish sharing.
So it doesn't, there's no word that talks about force or compulsion or anything, but I would say the Hebrew grammar implies that.
So what Rabbi Barnard said is that, and this is a fine point to make, that the version of the word for aliyah, the ma'alin, that is used in Hebrew, I see somebody taking a UC Hebrew, and I wonder what you make of this. It's in the form of the verb called the hifil, which is a causative version of the Hebrew verb in this case. So it is almost built into the Hebrew that you don't have to use an explicit word for force to imply that it is in fact a coercion. Okay, we could spend all day talking about the grammar, and I would enjoy that day. But any other words or thoughts about the meaning within it? Claire? And oh, I'm sorry, who are you?
I just think it's significant that both men and women enforce the other spouse.
It is one of those rare moments of second century egalitarianism. They are not everywhere, but they do sometimes exist. I appreciate y'all sharing. Again, we'll have plenty of opportunities to provide feedback and responses to texts and ideas. As I said, we're Jews. We anchor ourselves to historic texts. I think it's one of the most incredible things we do. This seemed like a good place to start. I will tell you what I saw in it. First of all, my wife Hara is here, and Hara, watch out, because according to the Mishnah, who knows? But really what I see in this is that as we consider our ongoing relationship with Israel, first of all, we can look at this as a text that names a different kind of Israel than the one we often talk about, right? This is not talking about the modern state of Israel. Of course, it didn't exist, in the second century of the Common Era. It's talking about the land of Israel. And it could be talking about any of a number of different, not states, I suppose, but empires that held on to Israel during different periods of history. So almost the state that Israel is a part of is irrelevant to this text. But what I see in it more than that, honestly, is just the long-term history that we Jews, this powerful long-term history that Jews have with Israel. The idea that even 1,800 years ago, Jews were setting down texts that said, not just can a husband compel his wife to move, and perhaps a husband could compel his wife to move any number of places during that world 2,000 years ago, but a wife could compel her husband to pick up their family and move to Israel is quite a statement for the society to be making. It says Israel is that level of important within the society, and even though our societies have changed quite a lot since then, Israel continues to play a vitally important role in how Jews understand their place within the world. Whether we live in Israel or don't live in Israel and want to live in Israel or don't want to live in Israel, there is no being Jewish without having some kind of relationship with Israel as far as I'm concerned. So let me keep us moving. We are still setting the stage, and I want to just go ahead and tackle one of the thorniest pieces of this conversation, which is to talk about what Zionism is. Zionism means a lot of things to a lot of different people. There is no universally accepted definition of Zionism, although there are more and less commonly accepted definitions of Zionism. In fact, there are many different big categories of Zionism that exist, that different people use to understand the way that they relate with Israel and the idea of there being a Jewish state, the idea of there being other states within that region, and so on. This is a common list of versions of Zionism that exist today. I see I misspelled diaspora, by the way, so diapora is meant to be diaspora, if you couldn't figure that one out. Just to name a couple of these that have real force and I think are pretty pervasive. I'll say first, by the way, all of these are arguably modern things. Jews have, as we established, had a long relationship with Israel going back even before the creation of this text, and yet there are new, novel ways that Jews interact with that relationship with Israel, and that's what we get to when we talk about different versions of Zionism. The version of Zionism that I think a lot of American Jews most relate to, the one that really led to the creation of the state of Israel as we know it, is modern political Zionism. This idea that Jews, as a manifestation of the idea of Jewish peoplehood and their Jewish identities, should work within the existing constraints of the world political order in order to ensure that Jews have a safe place, a state of their own. Notice, incidentally, that I didn't say in Israel. I didn't say in their ancestral homeland. And in fact, as we know, there were early modern political Zionists who said it doesn't need to be in our historic homeland. And there were proposals on the table, for instance, that Jews should have their state in Uganda or somewhere else. It hasn't always looked the way that it often looks now. But we also, we recognize something, which is that it is. Israel does exist now in a particular location, and so for that reason, people who consider themselves modern political Zionists today don't suggest that it should pick up and move and be somewhere else. That argument, for better or for worse, has been resolved. But people still talk in those frameworks. I want to also point out just one other of these versions of Zionism that exist. I talked about the easiest one, now I'll talk about the hardest one. That's revisionist Zionism. This is a version of Zionism that I think a lot in our progressive Jewish communities would label as an extremist version of Zionism that tends to suggest a maximal expansion of the Jewish state of Israel to occupy any of the territories that might once have been considered a biblical greater Israel. So when you think about Israeli politicians who forcefully push for the creation of settlements, and not, by the way, creation of settlements for economic reasons, which actually exist, or because there's open land available for development or something like that, but for the creation of settlements in, let's say, the West Bank, because that's how Jews can claim all of Greater Israel in the long scheme of history. These are people who often reflect this version of Zionism. And this isn't just to talk about Zionism, so I'm not going to go into all of them, but I just want to kind of acknowledge this fact that when we talk about loving Israel, to me, loving Israel is tied up very much in what it means to be a Zionist. And what it means to be a Zionist differs from person to person. So here's my definition, by the way. This is a definition that I find myself sharing all the time. I bet if someone put you on the spot and asked you to define Zionism, many people in this room might have a version of Zionism that looks largely similar to this. I define Zionism as the belief that Jews, as a people, have the right to self-determination, that is, the ability to control our own destiny in one form or another, in some portion of our ancestral homeland, that is what is now called Israel. Incidentally, and I share this all the time, this is a very nationalist understanding of what Zionism means, and my nationalism doesn't stop at Jews. Because this is a nationalist understanding of what it means to be a Zionist and for Israel to exist, I also believe that Palestinians have a right to some kind of comparable destiny. I don't know what that looks like, by the way. I thank God often enough that that is beyond my pay scale. But if I, in principle, believe that this is a thing that is good for peoples, for nations, I don't have any principled reason to think that it should only apply to me as a Jew, and to us as Jews, and to no one else. That is a complicated statement that is loaded in a ton of baggage that I respect, and there's a whole lot of negotiation and nuance that would go into unpacking all of its meanings. But let me ask this: what does Zionism mean to you? And again, I said I would give more opportunity to share feedback. I would take 3 to 5, at least that's what my notes tell me to do. I would take 3 to 5 answers of, let's say, succinct. This is dangerous, but succinct definitions of what you consider Zionism to mean. And I will repeat these into the microphone. Yeah.
My name is Mindy, and I'm a member of NEMA, and I'm a member of Ad Israel. I agree with that, the definition you just had up there. I wouldn't use self-determination, but I always said to people that, you know, if you're Italian, you have Italy, and if you're French, you have France. So why can't we, as Jewish people, have the state of Israel? So that's sort of how I said it. But my thought about the two-state solution changed on October 7th, 2 years ago.
Did that change, do you think? Actually, let me repeat, and then I will ask the question. So the statement was that in the same way that the French have France, the Italians have Italy, it makes sense for the Jews to have what is now Israel, and that your perspective on the two-state solution changed on October 7th. Let me just ask you this, and it's a big question. I wonder if you can give me a limited answer. How did you reconcile with that with how you think about Zionism?
My Zionism got stronger. I don't know if everybody's did, because anti-Semitism also went up along with it. But I can't do anything about the Palestinians that are living with terrorists. But I don't want to reward terrorists with a country.
Okay. So I'll try to just quickly capture that your Zionist identity became stronger, and that you don't want to see terrorism rewarded in a way that would create a state for Palestinians. I appreciate you sharing that. Nothing makes me happier than having tough conversations, and nothing makes me sadder than avoiding them. So thank you for bringing us deeply into it from the get-go. Let's take divergent opinions. How do other people share or define their Zionism? Yeah.
I would say that Zionism, to me, it just means that you allow Jews of wherever they are in any country to have a safe place to go. And if they choose to have a homeland, which is different than, I think, than from saying, well, if you're French, you've got France. If you're American, you have here, at least for now, some of us. And so at least though with Jews, it's worldwide. And then they have a safe place. I always feel awkward saying this, especially, actually I've never said this. So like, don't follow me out to the parking lot. But I feel like after October 7th, obviously, you know, that was horrific. But we have to remember that that a lot of the Palestinians don't like Hamas either. They're forced to live under them. And some of the kids who are there, Palestinian children who have been, and had their homes blown up, whatever, were born after October 7th. And I think, so obviously, we don't want to reward terrorists, but not every single person there is a terrorist.
And I think this is a very good illustration of one of the challenges that we will talk about today. Maxine, who didn't share her name, but Maxine expressed that her definition of Zionism is that Jews, wherever they should happen to live, would have access to a safe place. Did you mean that there is an Israel, or that a Jew in France can be safe in France?
Well, but the term Zionism means that they have their own homeland.
So that's how you mean it then. So that Jews, even if we live in the diaspora, that there exists a safe homeland for us in Israel, for instance.
Because then when you make Aliyah to...
Yeah. And Maxine also shared this balanced concern, which is that we recognize that even if Palestinians may be governed by what we know to be a terrorist organization within Gaza, not all of them are responsible ethically for that situation. Let's take one more response. Yeah.
So I agree with what Fred, and I'm from here, so the arguer. So I agree with those things. However, the other thing I would add is country has been around for 77 years now. It has a right to exist for no other reason than it's been around for 77 years, and that it has other reasons to exist. But the idea of river to the sea, to me, is obscene.
So Fred, yeah?
Yeah.
Fred points out that in how he thinks about Israel and Zionism, he would point out that there is there's an expectation that once a state is established and has been around for a length of time, that it has an intrinsic right to continue existing. Is that fair? And so to advocate to eliminate that is not a reasonable position. Have I captured your words okay? I'm glad. So let me keep us moving, if only because I realize that I will eat all our time so well if I don't. We're still in section 1, and I want us to at least get to section 2 by the end of this. I'm going to create an opportunity in just a moment for y'all to chime in. So notice this question. I'll come back to the question in a moment, but notice the question is, what are the things we want to have come to mind or to feel when we think about Israel? So that's the question. You're going to want to grab your phones, and here's what you're going to do. We're going to use a technology that's going to let us do something neat. You're going to want to go to whatever texting application you use on your phone to send text messages. I give you a second to get there. And you are going to want to send a text message to the phone number 22333. Is that 3 threes? My eyes are so bad. So 2 twos and 3 threes. That makes perfect sense. I bet that's why they did it. And you are going to want to then, in the message field, the text that you would send, write my name and then 713. So Ari Jun 713. So you're texting to the phone number 22333, and in the body of the text first, there's going to be a second thing in a second. You're going to write Ari Jun 713. No spaces, no periods, no nothing like that. And then after it, you see how I have the word answer here? You don't have to write answer. That's where you put your answer. So however you would answer the question, how do you want to feel? Not how do you feel? What are the good ways you want to feel when you think about Israel? Or what are the good things you want to think about when you think about Israel? And what's going to happen, God willing, is that as we get responses, it's working, the technology is working online. You can join us here too, if you choose. What's funny is I can't see them here, but I can see them there, so I'm going to have to come around to this side. Go ahead and continue to chime in. Let's see what we come up with together.
Ari, I left my phone in the car.
Well, you can harass someone next to you to use their phone. Oh yeah, and then hit send, and you should see it momentarily after that.
Thank you.
Oh, you know, I bet I can. Aha, look at that. So, I don't know if it's because multiple people sent it or because it came in early, but I'm noticing that proud is staying toward the center of the cloud of words. Theoretically, but I don't know if it really does that. Okay, so I'm being told that that is exactly what it means. It means that one of the things we most want to feel when thinking about Israel is proud. We want to think about the idea of safety. We think about community and history, Jewish peoplehood. I like family down there. For me, that's something I think about a lot in this kind of category of ideas. I see bloom, which I love because that's one of the things I think about, you know, the idea of the people who made the desert bloom. Oh, I see dessert, which I think was supposed to be desert, but I think I like it most as dessert. I see innovative. That also, again, this is one I thought about, is that when we think about Israel, we want to think about the upstart nation. This innovative people who's finding ways to desalinate water and making technology and cancer research and all of these other things. I'm going to give you another second to look at that screen, and then I'm going to move us on to something different. Here's where we're going to make this hard pivot, right? We've established, I wonder if I go back if that's still there. Yeah, it is. So we've established all these wonderful things that we want to think about, and I'm sure many of us do also think about when we talk about Israel. And at the same time, because of the nature of the world that we live in right now, those are not the things that we often think about when we think about Israel. These are often not the things we feel when we think about Israel. So I'm going to just name a few things. This is not the exhaustive list. This is not the perfect list. This is just a list of several things that I think many of us wind up thinking about when we think about Israel. Most recently, I think it's safe to say that in the last 2.5 years, but it's November, so 2 years and 1 month, we have been thinking about October 7th. That came up in some of our answers earlier. And we've been thinking about the war that happened after October 7th. We've probably been thinking about pictures that we've seen of Gaza. We've probably been thinking about hostages, Israeli hostages, who were taken during the October 7th attack. Probably thinking about bodies that have been returned in the last, a month or so now, of Israelis. Probably think about young families who have been hurt on both sides of the border. We think about rockets that have been launched into Israel. We think about numbers like 60% of buildings in Gaza have been destroyed in the last 2 years. We think about the West Bank. That was all just in the south and in the north so far. We think about the West Bank, where there is an uncomfortable position between Israelis and Palestinians, where Israelis do govern the lives of Palestinians who live within the West Bank, more or less. We think about the fact that Israel does not control all of the land borders for Palestinians, that Israel exerts a large influence on what does come in and go out of those territories. We think about tunnels and the terrible impact that those have had on Israelis psychologically and in point of physical safety. Those are the things that tend to come to mind, I think, for many of us when we think about Israel. And something, a thought that's been ringing through my head for 2 years and then also before that, is a question of, I was brought up on this idea of, the dream. If you will it is no dream, this Herzlian paradigm of what it means to be a Jew and to think about Israel. And what I think about these days is that what we have right now is not the thing I think any of us dreamed about. That's not to say that I don't want Israel to exist. Hardly. I am a Zionist. But this isn't what the dream was, which means we have a long way to go. So we've made it a long way, and I still haven't defined moral injury, so let me do that. Some of you might be familiar with this concept. For others of you, it might be new. For me, it forms a very helpful framework to think about what it means to be a Jew dealing with these sorts of issues. And let me say, too, by the way, you don't have to have agreed with every single thing I said about what many of us think about when we think about the challenges related to Israel's existence in this moment. Even just to accept 25% of those looks very different than this. So the question is, how do we reconcile that? And there is this idea of moral injury. I took this particular definition of moral injury from one of the centers that studies the phenomenon. But in effect, what moral injury is the clash that happens to us psychologically. When we have, on one hand, certain understandings of what justice and morality are and should be, including especially ideas of justice and morality that are connected to us. Whether it's about what we ourselves do or about what people related to us, our people, do or don't do. And then on the other hand, we have reality. And reality doesn't seem to be matching that set of stated or believed values. And what emerges from that is this concept of moral injury. Moral injury actually, I'm not a subject matter expert on this, right? But my understanding of moral injury is that it actually first emerges as a deeper explanation of some experiences of PTSD. That people who come home from conflicts often feel that they were engaged in or close to acts that they can't reconcile with their understanding of values. And so a whole body of scholarship emerges about what it is that happens to our understanding of ourselves and how we have this, we could call a major point of cognitive dissonance that we have to find ways to accommodate when we understand the world around us. And I'm going to just show one last slide before we get into the second section of this, which is the question of blame. This actually probably should be later in the presentation, except that I bet there are already people who are thinking about this issue, and I figured why wait to address it? I recently shared with some folks I know about a book that I thought was really remarkable about conflict, called High Conflict by Amanda, I want to say Ripley, but I could be wrong. I talk about her later on, so we'll find out if I'm right or wrong soon enough. But she uses a phrase in her book that is just the best, which is a concept that a marriage counselor could ask of their clients when trying to expose how a conflict isn't helping anyone, which is the rhetorical question of who's winning the marriage? i.e., if you're trying to figure out who's winning the marriage, nobody's winning the marriage. And I think when it comes to a lot of Jews' psychological distress in this moment, or moral injury, if we want to use that word, this is a who's winning the marriage moment. There are good ethical questions we should be talking about when it comes to who's to blame with all of this. Those aren't invalid questions. They're perfectly valid questions. I just don't think they're the right questions to ask when answering these issues. Because when it comes down to it, my understanding of self, and I'll just speak from the first person, my understanding of self and of morality and Jewish peoplehood is injured greatly whether 50,000 Palestinians in Gaza die and it's Israel's fault, or 50,000 Palestinians in Gaza die and it's Hamas's fault. Those are ethically different situations. I'm not saying that the difference doesn't matter. I'm saying my conscience struggles either way to reconcile the fact that there are innocent people who are suffering because of this. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I have to find some way to integrate that data into my sense of Jewish self and Zionism, no matter who's to blame for it. So we can have the blame conversation. I just think it's a different conversation than this one. All right, let's keep us going. We're switching colors. I got real artsy with this presentation, so we're out with the blue, in with the red. Let's talk about questions of morality and emotions. We are going to have y'all chime in again a second time. And this time I want you to answer differently. I want you to answer, what negative emotions do you experience or feel when thinking about Israel today? I want you to focus specifically on emotions. Don't focus on acts, dates, or anything like that. What are the emotions you feel? You should be able, okay, good, you're doing it. You just used the exact same text message conversation, and now somehow through the technology it knows to put it here. I don't know how it works, but it works great. Yep, just on the exact same text thread. I'm sure there's some way on the back end for me to know how many people say different things. I don't know how to do that. But shame started and seems to have remained in the center of this circle, which I think indicates that it's something that a variety of people said. I actually noticed early, and it's still relatively large, confused popped up, and I think that resonates with me a lot, and I wonder, I guess it does resonate with a number of you too. Sadness. I actually appreciate sadness a lot in this because it's a completely value-absent experience of emotion. I can be sad, again, regardless of who's to blame, and look at this and say, this isn't what I wish were going on in that part of the world. I see my name. I see angst, bravery. I see pride, and I appreciate this. I own the fact that in this moment, there is still a deep desire to feel positive connection with Israel, and I absolutely respect that as someone who himself is a Zionist. Apprehension, disappointment, worry. Families here too. I don't know if that was a carryover from the last one, but if it wasn't, I wonder what the person said. I'm going to pretend I'm in their shoes and say that when I think about challenges right now, I think about my family that's in Israel, who's both part of a country that is struggling, and I am sad and fear for their safety. So these are very real emotions. And I appreciate y'all sharing. Let me name just a few emotions that are commonly experienced by people who are in some sort of moral injury moment. These are the ones the researchers say are pretty common. It's actually striking that notice what was at the center of ours, and notice what the first one that they indicate is, which is that when you experience moral injury, it is common to feel this sense of shame. Because we deeply, as human beings, want the way that we are to match up with the way we want the world to be. And shame is one of the things that happens when those don't line up. Anxiety, that makes a lot of sense. I think about Israel a lot more these days in the last couple of years than I did in prior years. And it's compelled in a lot of ways by this sense of anxiety, this dread of what's the next thing I'm going to read about, whether that's injuries against Israelis incidentally or against Palestinians. Stress and anger too. Let me turn us a little bit, and I want to think about the ways that we manage these emotions, because I wonder if what we're going to look at next is something that resonates with y'all. Human beings don't like experiencing negative emotions. Just in general, we try to avoid this stuff. And there are some pretty common strategies that people do use. I bet you've had conversations with people who use these strategies before to deal with moral injury in this way, right? If, as I set out at the beginning, moral injury is this clash between believed values on the one hand and reality on the other. So it stands to reason there are at least a couple of ways that you can prevent moral injury. On the first, you could alter the data. So you could choose not to believe that the facts are what they appear to be. I think that in a lot of ways, this is why Jews fight so vehemently about the exact death toll in Gaza, for instance. I don't know ethically why it makes any difference if it's 50,000 or 70,000 Gazans who are killed during this conflict. We can still talk about blame. We can still talk about that it's 20,000 lives. That really makes a difference. But as far as the ethical conversation about this clash between values and reality deal with, it's not a numeric difference that actually changes the experience. So if we fixate on the data and saying the data is or isn't this, we can distract ourselves from the clash. Yeah.
I was going to speak up and say that the world doesn't necessarily care what the numbers are, but I care that nobody talks about the Israeli children that had to leave their homes or didn't have homes that were safe to live somewhere else because their one parent or both parents were at war and there wasn't an income coming in and the state of Israel had to help support them. And all the resilience.
I care about this too, and I would also say things like, I care about the fact that the world doesn't talk about other conflicts going on.
Correct.
Other places where more deaths have occurred than in Israel by many orders of magnitude. And let me show you an example of what we are engaging in when we focus on that. It doesn't mean we're wrong. It means it's one way we alleviate this kind of stress. And that is to alter the moral calculus. We can either change the facts. We got a clash between, on the one hand, facts, and on the other hand, morals. So we change the morals or we change the facts. We say that, for instance, well, everybody's talking about the suffering in Gaza. What about the suffering in Israel? And that changes the moral calculus. We say everybody's focused on the suffering in Gaza, but nobody's focused on the suffering in Sudan. That changes the moral equation. I'm not saying, by the way, that any of these are wrong. I do them too. I bet most of us do them at some point, and I bet y'all know some folks who do them a lot more than others. These are ways that we help to protect ourselves psychologically from an issue like moral injury. I'm going to give you a third path, and then I would love to hear what you want to say. And this is what I would call, kind of facetiously, this is the path of the Jewish youth. We tune out. If we don't consume the data or engage in the conversation, we don't deal with the moral injury. And I think that it's not just younger people, but that is one of those threads of conversation that I think Jews have focused on a lot recently. And I think it defines young people and plenty of other Jews. This is a third pathway to not have to experience something that is psychologically difficult.
My father murdered people in World War II, and the people he murdered, Germans, they had already killed his entire family, but he felt very, very guilty. So you could kill people that are about to kill you, and will kill you. I mean, there was no question they were going to kill him if they could, and still feel morally ambiguous about it. So simply feeling shame for killing somebody, because like I said, my father killed Germans, and only 3 people survived out of 5,000 people in the town. They just killed everybody. They didn't bother taking them to concentration camps. So feeling morally shame doesn't mean you're wrong.
And that's why I say that when I talked about blame, that is a perfectly valid ethical question to ask, because the ethics of this do matter. But as it turns out, you can still feel moral injury for doing something that you believe is right. but just taxes your sense of identity of who you are. So the point that was brought up was, well, what if you're killing, I'm gonna really simplify it. What if you have to kill in self-defense? That's effectively what you're asking. And that can also cause moral injury. Because if it undermines your sense, well, I'm not the kind of person who would have to or would kill someone, and you find yourself needing to kill in self-defense, I think all of us would probably argue that that's ethically appropriate. Judaism would even say it's ethically mandatory, that you are supposed to kill in self-defense if needed. And yet you can still experience the psychological discomfort. So on one hand, we have the ethical questions, which are real, and on the other, we have this psychological, emotional experience, and that's what we're focused on today. But it's not to say that the other one doesn't matter, because it absolutely does. I want to just tell you in short order, this is what I would say is the crux of this discussion. This is my argument when it comes to the experience of moral injury for Jews like progressive Jews, Jews like Jews who live in America. I would say, number one, as a Zionist, I would say this. Because of our history and our present attachment to it, because nearly half of the world's Jews live in Israel, and I care about the fate of world's Jews, because I love Israel deeply, I must be connected to Israel. I'm a Zionist. I have to be connected to Israel. And in fact, even if you eliminate a bunch of those statements, if you say, I don't like Israel's government, I don't want to be connected to it, I don't this, I don't that, I would still make this argument. Because whether you like it or not as a Jew, you're connected to Israel. I would then say, as those people who are connected to Israel, we should be spending a lot of time thinking about it. I don't like that middle pathway of tuning out. I would say that it is a perfectly rational, understandable response that people have, and I would dare say that it's a cop-out. I don't think tuning out is the right answer. And with my understanding of what's going on and has gone on in Israel, the conflicts that have been part of its continued existence, which is not to say the conflicts are Israel or Jewish people's fault, but just the fact that there has been persistent conflict associated with Israel's existence, the dream that isn't the dream I wanted it to be, we should be experiencing moral injury right now as Jews. It's okay. The way I would put this, there are a lot of Jews who think that if they don't experience the psychological distress, if they are stoic, it means that they're better or stronger. And I don't buy that one bit. I think it's a good thing for a variety of reasons that I will tell you in a second, and you can disagree with me. I will welcome your disagreement. But I think it's a good thing for us to accept the fact that this is a really challenging time to be Jews who are connected to Israel and love Israel. And I would put myself in all of those categories. And to set us up for the next little section here, this is the problem. Accepting the costs of Israel's existence, not the blame, but the costs that are associated with Israel existing, which we can understand are very high for Palestinians and Israelis. Go to Israel on their day of remembrance for fallen soldiers. You will see how high the cost is and how pervasively it is felt even by Israelis. That psychological pain can make you feel trapped. And we want to think about how we go from feeling trapped to feeling motivated, like we can do something about it. And that's a perfect segue, which is why I planned it that way, for moving forward. I'm going to give you just a few strategies. These are not the end-all, be-all. These are a few things that I have found to be effective strategies for dealing with incredibly difficult moments like this, incredibly difficult social circumstances like this. All of these sorts of issues, I think this can help. I would be interested, and I will be interested to hear your feedback, especially if you have moments in your lives, as you see the strategies I'll recommend, that made you think of things like this, or I guess in reverse. If the strategies make you think of those moments in your lives or those conflicts you've seen and so on. So let me just go ahead and get started. First of all, there is this deep, deep social compulsion for us to pick a team, as it were. That either we are pro-Israel or we're pro-Palestine. And I would say that when it comes to dealing with this moment of difficulty, and especially the psychological issues of it, it's not helping. I'm not saying that we need to have a kumbaya moment and say that we're all the children of God and we should sit down with the members of Hamas and see if they like hummus too. And I don't buy that. I'm not saying that that's a viable strategy or will help anyone. What I'm saying is, to the extent that it's reasonable and possible to extend the circle of us and limit the circle of them, it is worthwhile. The more people with whom we can feel in connection, the better, as human beings and also strategically speaking. Because when you have more allies, you get more things done. Take that as like a community organizing strategy, I believe, with every fiber of my being. When you limit your circle of us, you undermine your power. And it doesn't make you feel good. It is not psychologically rewarding to feel like you are being assaulted by the world around you. So if you can extend the circle of people that you consider to be partners, not perfect partners, there's a good adage that I will probably say very ineloquently of community organizing, that there are no permanent adversaries and no permanent allies. And I think it's relevant to this too. Our partners in our circles of us don't have to always be in the us. They can alternate from time to time depending on what we're talking about, but the more often we can have a more expanded circle of us, the better for our own well-being and for our ability to have an impact on stuff we care about. I would urge you, and this one comes, I told you I'd get her name, and I got it right, it is Amanda Ripley. She gives this concept that I think is really beautiful, which is to indulge in abandoning the conflict. That's not, let me tell you what that doesn't mean before I tell you what that does mean. Again, it doesn't mean the kumbaya, we can all be friends with Hamas. Abandoning the conflict can't mean that you will then die. What abandoning the conflict means is to abandon your sentimental connection with feeling in conflict. Because often enough, people in conflict will perpetuate their existence in a conflict because they are so accustomed to being in it, they don't know who they are without it. I want you to imagine for a moment. Israel and Palestinians forge a universally accepted peace plan. I mean, it's unbelievable. I'm not telling you need to believe it. I'm saying to suspend the disbelief for a moment. All 100% of the Israelis and 100% of the Israelis and Palestinians, 100% of Jews and Arabs and Muslims worldwide all accept this, whatever magical solution it is. I think a lot of Jews would have a hard time reconfiguring what their Jewish identity means in a world with the absence of this conflict. Myself included, by the way. That's a crazy thing to reckon with. That it has actually become part of our Jewish identities to be in conflict in this way. I don't think I am ready to abandon the conflict, so to speak. It's not like you just do it and you're finished. But I would say that for all of us, trying to think about what it would feel like if we were able to not be in conflict can at least begin to give us a little bit of hope for what it looks like at that next day, the day after. Because God willing, in at least some of us in this room's lifetimes, there will be peace. And Jews are going to have to figure out what our identity means without it. We might as well start now. Yeah.
That raises an issue, and I was just thinking, most of us in the room are old enough to remember 1967, and I suspect very few of us really thought much. I mean, yes, it was there. We have Pushkin in our homes, but Janet Pushkin. But how much did we think of Israel?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't so. Israel is not, I don't believe, as central to our lives as it is today. Our lives as a Jew.
So the opinion that was being shared is that once upon a time, say in 1967, and I think we could probably even get more recent to some extent than 67, but 67 certainly was a moment. But there were times when Israel was one part of a Jewish identity, but not something that Jews globally thought about all the time. It wasn't such a persistent, aware thing in what it meant to be Jewish. Those days, I think you would agree, are long past. For better or for worse, Israel is a major component about how Jews understand themselves in feel good and feel bad ways. I'm going to just keep us going through the rest of these strategies. But I appreciate you sharing, and I welcome, please jump in. I would love to hear reflections on what you see in these things. This one is just, I wasn't at the second presentation by Rabbi Scott Shafran. It was the only one I was going to miss because I was out of town. But I heard that he delved into sorts of strategies like this. I was at the first one by Rabbi Noah Farrow, and I know that he talked about things like this. These are evergreen strategies for working to handle moments of difficulty like the one that we are in. What I would tell you about the curiosity and empathy here is that the more you learn about this conflict, the better equipped you will be able to handle any component of it. The more you learn about Israel, about its history, about Arabs who live in the Levant, who now identify as Palestinians, the more you're going to be able to make sense of this moment. I would say, too, the reason I put empathy and curiosity together is to be unassuming in how you encounter people and information. Most of the time, people are not malicious in the world. That doesn't mean they don't have bad results with their actions. People unwittingly have all sorts of bad results all the time. But you should at the very least give them the kaf zchut, the benefit of the doubt, to presume that they are engaging on these topics because they too care. Especially within the Jewish community, I think that is something we could all do better a lot of the time. I got a couple more suggestions. I would tell you, I would say this, and I say it often enough, to not believe in any easy solutions. As I put it often enough, if it were so easy, it would already be solved. This is one of those complicated conflicts, not one that's eternal, but one that isn't going to get solved overnight. That's why we're still here. That's why post-1967, how many years has it been? What's the math on that? 58 years. Wait, no, that can't be right. 51 years? See, I'm not, okay. 58 years. I shouldn't have questioned the math. I suspect also in 67, which, wink, wink, I was not around for, but I do know about, Jews were not thinking this is still the part of the conversation we're going to be dealing with more than half a century later. It's complicated. That's why we're still dealing with it. In that same vein, be patient. One of the interesting things about this that I think about a lot is that we rarely know the seeds that are being planted in a particular moment that will bear productive fruit down the road, right? When it comes to peace or when it comes to relationship, you plant as many seeds as you possibly can because you don't know which seeds are going to grow. We do not know right now which seeds that grow in 15 years will be because of this moment. There is one particular moderate Palestinian peace activist. His name is Mohammed Fuad al-Khatib. I'm sure I've mispronounced that. Who is doing remarkable work in trying to forge a moderate Palestinian identity that is committed both to self-determination for Palestinians and safety and security for Israelis in a Jewish Israeli state. I don't know if in 20 years, to take him as one example, that something he's planting a seed for right now might ultimately lead us to the end of this conflict. And by the way, I know that you could say that we have been patient. That would be a pretty reasonable thing to say, and we've got nothing to do but to continue being patient. So we might as well lean into it. I think I have got one more recommendation, and this is one No, I've got two more recommendations. This is one I really, truly believe in, which is that when you hit those moments of deepest darkness, when it comes to moral injury, for instance, be willing to shift your frame of reference. I picked this picture as an illustration. I could have picked like 75 different pictures. But I heard this explanation from Mati Friedman, who is somebody who has done a lot of work in journalism and covering of this conflict for decades, where he points out, depending on what frame of reference you use, the Israel-Palestine conflict can be read in very, very different ways. On the one hand, and I couldn't show just this side of it, so imagine it's just the left side of that picture. On the one hand, you could imagine this as a conflict between the big state of Israel and the little disenfranchised groups of Palestinians, David and Goliath as a story. And depending on what frame of reference you use, you might look at a larger map and say, this is a billion Arab Muslims in a variety of rich, financed states waging war against a tiny nation of Israel. I'm not telling you, by the way, I don't think either of those is the right frame of reference. It's probably somewhere in the middle. But depending on what frame of reference you use, you can understand the world in radically different ways. And I think the same is probably true as we look at the individual manifestations of this conflict. Depending on what we choose to focus on, we can either feel more or less hopeless. And I would recommend you find a frame of reference that feels more hopeful. Given there's enough hopelessness on this topic, there's no reason to make yourself gratuitously hopeless. And on that upbeat note, let me give you a downbeat note. I would also encourage you to lean into the pain for one really clear reason. When we experience unsustainable pain, we tend to solve the problems that are causing it. Not always. This is not perfect. But generally speaking, if we have a conflict, whether it's in international affairs or in our families or in our workplace or you name the setting, we will tolerate things as long as we decide the pain can be handled long term. And if we are denying the fact that we are in pain right now or dealing with psychological distress, we are not going to be inclined to deal with what is, in actual point of fact, a conflict that is causing harm to our people. So I would encourage you to experience the pain, not to be so stoic and to imagine it isn't affecting you. No matter your configuration as a Jew and as a Zionist, I would say it's affecting you. I'm going to skip the last piece here because I'm running just a hair behind my schedule. I was going to talk about other history, but if I open up that can of worms of historical parallels to this, where long wars lead to sudden solutions, we could be here all night, and so I won't do that. But suffice to say, this wouldn't be the first conflict in human history or in recent history where it seemed like it would never end, and then it does. There is no reason to imagine that this conflict will be uniquely the only conflict in the history of humanity that will never have an end. Don't let yourself believe that. It will have an end. How it ends and when it ends, we don't yet know. But it will, because the rest of them always have. This one will too. So I want you to go ahead and pull out your phones one last time, and then we're going to turn to some Q&A. I want you to answer this question. What gives you hope for Israel? So the question is, whether you're online, you're in person, use that same text thread that you've used before. What is giving you hope for Israel? After this, we're going to turn to some questions. So if you have the note card and you wrote something on it, I don't know how we're going to collect that back, but we'll collect it back. If you have the note card and you haven't written anything on it, please feel free to write a question down. We're getting amazing diversity of answers here, which is awesome. I'm just going to acknowledge something or observe, which is that we had much more clustered answers, like much more commonality of the answers provided on the negative questions than on the positive questions. And I don't know what that means. I'm just observing it. So history gives me hope. Jews generally give me hope. Depends on the day of the week, y'all. But determination, I like. Leadership, leadership is one of those value neutral things. Depending on what leadership you have, leadership will give you hope. So we can hope for good leadership that will then also in turn give us hope too. I see the Abraham Accords on there, and I will agree with that one absolutely. That's something that gives me hope. That is one of those things that has broken impasses that we never thought would break in the way that they broke. I saw mothers on there before, but it's moved around, and I don't know where. Oh, bottom right. Thank you. Mothers in Israel and amongst Palestinians are doing incredible things. And actually, in other conflicts historically, mothers have actually been some of the organizers that have worked to end conflict. So we should not underestimate the mothers in this equation. I'll just note the one at the very top, which I appreciate, which is that there is always hope. Okay, so let me turn to y'all. What questions do you have? Yeah.
Bottom, like middle, I recognize the word mensch, but I don't know if it changes when it.
Menschlichkeit. Menshiness. Fair question. Is that fair, Rabbi Werber? Menshiness? It's the quality of being mensch-like. No, I mean, don't work too hard for the Yiddish. Okay, so do we have any questions on the note cards? Is there anyone who could collect cards for us? I'll start there, because the people who wrote on the cards followed the rules, and it only feels appropriate to give them deference. Here, I'll take this one and get started with something while other people scribble.
We'll keep looking around as we get our attention.
This is a tough question, and I'm going to just read it verbatim because I think it's a good, tough question. And I bet it's a question, incidentally, that many people have experienced or thought or dealt with. What do I say to Jews and others, mostly young people, who say that Israelis are terrorists and have no right to exist? We're starting off at 100 miles an hour here, which, as I've stated multiple times, is my way to live life. I'm happy about it. I'm going to go back to, I'm not going to literally go back because I like having this here. It's very positive. But cognitively, let's go back to the slide that talked about compassion and curiosity. I would say work to try to understand, be genuinely curious about why they are saying what they say. If you know like the dichotomy of shot and drash for interpretation of text, there's the literal meaning and there's the deeper meaning. Don't get stuck on the shot. Don't assume that what they're saying is actually what it's about. I'm not saying that they're faking it or something. What I'm saying is there are probably deeper things going on than the surface level question that exists. And it'll be good for you to understand what's motivating them, just because it's good to understand people in life. I just intrinsically value that. But B, if you just want to be pragmatic about it, there's no good way to answer a question if you don't understand at least a little bit about why it's being asked. So you would do well to try to understand the person asking the question, what's motivating them. Is it that they feel that they would be ostracized from certain social circles? And so they have embedded their perspectives within those social circles. Is it that they were taught something in Sunday school as a Jewish kid and it doesn't seem to match what they see going on these days? That's a common one. Any number of different answers could exist that would deal with that well, and you can't even start without understanding why they're saying it. And by the way, too, as someone who asks people the why question a lot, people won't usually give you the real answer to the why question on the first try. So don't be afraid to ask again. Don't do it in a petulant way. They'll give you a secondary answer, and then you'll need to find some way to ask again, but tell me what's underneath that? And when you finally get to something that feels substantive and real, then you can start to answer the question. What other cards do we have? I saw people scribbling, so there must be cards somewhere. Or maybe they were acting it out. Thank you. So a rhetorical question. This conflict has existed for more than 100 years. What can end this? The first piece of this, by the way, is to discuss, has it existed for 100 years? Depending on what we're talking about within the conflict, we could say that this really has only existed since 1967 would be a fair answer. Not that no part of this has existed, but the current configuration that seems intractable has only existed since 67. We could say that it started in 1947 and 1948 with the creation of the Israeli states. We could say it started in the early 20th century. I would say actually the late 19th century with the migration of Jews in large number to what is now Israel. We could say it started in 1917 with the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire and the creation of the Palestine Mandate. So I would first undermine the question and just say, it depends when we choose to pick the starting point. And now I'm being pedantic. The real, speculative answer to the rhetorical question, I really think that both peoples need to be tired of this conflict and acknowledge that they're tired of this conflict. And I would say something else too. Acknowledge that there's no winning over the other party in the conflict. I don't mean winning over as in convincing. I mean defeating, ultimately defeating. Israelis need to accept fundamentally, and it is not the case that all Israelis accept this, that Palestinians aren't going anywhere. And that Palestinians who aren't going anywhere in the long run have a right to be equal citizens in a state. And Palestinians need to accept, somebody made some comments about this, Fred, you made a comment about it earlier, that Israel has been around for 70, gosh, I'm bad at math, whatever years, 77 years, and it's not going anywhere. And the Jews aren't going anywhere, and that Jews have a right to self-determination and safety. And until both of those people acknowledge both of those premises, we're not going to near peace. But I think that there's a growing chance the more folks tend to become fed up with the conflict. There we go. It's like a Nachshon, and then suddenly you have a bunch of things. What disqualifies a person from being a Zionist? I'll give my answer to that question, but it's not as though there's a universal answer to that question. In my mind, if you do not believe that the Jews have a right to a state, I would go that superficially to give like the most universally potentially applicable answer. If you do not believe that Jews have a right to a state anywhere, then I don't think you're a Zionist. It doesn't mean I don't like you, by the way. I would have coffee and we'd have conversation, and I would want to get to understand your perspective, genuinely. But I don't think the word Zionist would capture your perspective. I'm going to take a couple more questions. Oh, we got some here too. Thank you, Sam. I'm gonna read this whole question because I really appreciate the brutal honesty of the question. How do I deal with NPR airing negative stories on Israel every day? And every is underlined here. And then the question goes on to say, I know I am using one of the deflections, but the above perpetuates anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. I think this is a both sort of thing. It does perpetuate anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. I think it's a problem too. It's not that it's unethical or intrinsically bad to engage in the deflections. It's that the deflections, we should be aware, are a strategy that we tend to subconsciously or consciously use to deal with moral injury. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. So I mentioned Mati Friedman, who talked about the frame of reference with Israel. One of the things that Mati became infamous for doing was I want to say it's like early 2000s, maybe like 2004-ish. He had been a reporter with, I think, the AP, so, one of the most respected news wires. And he published a report in which he discussed the fact that, I'm going to mangle the numbers, but take not the exactness of them, but the scale. The average place, the average country had something like 2 to 3 AP journalists who covered it. And Israel and Palestine persistently had something like 30 journalists at any given time from the AP. That's a problem. That tells you that this isn't about news, but it's about narrative in a different sort of way. That's really important for us as Jews to think about because it does perpetuate anti-Semitism and it can make things worse. And also, it may just be one of those strategies that we latch onto to help protect ourselves. Because whether there are 30 AP journalists covering an issue or not, if what they cover is real, we should still be trying to accommodate it within our understanding of the world. So it's okay to do that and to be aware that you do it. So why focus on blame versus solutions? I never do. I don't think you should. Not because blame doesn't matter, because I am very pragmatic in my understanding of the world. And what I care most about is not who is at fault for the conflict, but that there's an end to the conflict. You don't have to agree with me about that, by the way, but that is how I approach the issue. I desperately want to see a world in which Israelis and Palestinians live in safety and security and without conflict with one another. I don't believe in some immediate utopia that's going to erupt. So for instance, I hear from a lot of people who say, well, why can't we just have a single binational state? A big Israel or a big Palestine where everybody has a kumbaya moment and lives together. And what I generally say is, wouldn't that be nice in 150 years? Let's work on just having a basic peace first. And I don't think that's going to happen in a one-state solution, given our recent history between these two peoples. That's not an idealistic way of approaching the issue. It is purely pragmatic. And that's the same reason I don't focus on blame. I would say, except that if discussing the blame can help you get toward solutions, then sure, take it into your calculations. But otherwise, it's just a distraction that gets us further from solving this thing, and that is what I personally care most about. Got this question. Do you think young Jews have tuned out or turned on Israel, and that's turned on, for lack of a better word, it says in the question, turned on Israel because mainstream Jews and Jewish institutions will not acknowledge the crimes carried out by or endorsed by the Israeli government? It's a loaded question, y'all. I will speak only in the first hand. I have been a Zionist. I actually did not used to use the word Zionist to describe myself, not because I had any issue with it, but because it just didn't carry so much resonance for me until the last few years. But I have effectively been a Zionist my entire life, right? Let me tell you, before I called myself a Zionist, I had an Israeli flag up in my bedroom as a high schooler, so I probably count as some kind of Zionist. I got that Israeli flag, I don't know where it is today, it's lost somewhere in a box, but I got that Israeli flag on a trip to Auschwitz. While I was in high school, I had gone on what was then called EIE, is now Heller High, which is the Reform Movement's exchange program for high school students. So I lived in Israel for a semester when I was in high school. I had always been taught very, very traditionalist, let's say, versions of Israeli history, including while I was in Israel, which is where I also acquired this Israeli flag. I was in all ways bought in. And I experienced a lot of struggle to accommodate what it meant to still be a Zionist when the very facile and simplistic version of Zionism in Israeli history I had been taught clearly did not match what a reasonable observer would describe. Which is not to say that Israel is uniquely evil. I don't buy it. Or that it is Israel's blame for all things. I don't buy it. But I will say I don't think I don't think mainstream Jewish institutions do the Jewish world any favors by presenting simplistic frameworks that will break down when presented with any scrutiny. It is a fundamentalist version of Israel, and fundamentalism does not sustain critique very well. When you have the first crack in fundamentalism, the whole thing shatters. So I don't think we should be teaching that. I'll say when I hear that question, I'm really struck by the acknowledgement of crimes carried out by Israel. It's something that still hurts my Jewish identity to think about, that Israel certainly has had people who are responsible for things that we would define as crimes. It is not an easy reality. But I don't think we're helping to prolong and build Zionist Jewish identity in anyone, especially younger people, if we don't get them into the weeds and help them to learn how to have the tough conversations before they go out into the broader world and have a less sympathetic and Zionist-friendly set of folks around them. I'm gonna leave it here because I wanted to try to keep this at about 90 minutes, which is already, in my belief, 45 minutes longer than the average person's attention span. So let me just thank you so much for being here tonight, for asking very bold questions and offering bold answers to questions that I asked, for making yourself vulnerable in many cases, for sharing things you hadn't shared before. To the point of that most recent question, I deeply believe that these are the conversations that our Jewish community needs to have right now and will thrive by having right now. So I'm grateful to Rabbi Werber for being here. Do you want to share a closing thought? Yeah.
Are you all done?
I'm all done.
This was awesome. That's my closing thought. And your presentation was phenomenal. And it only works if we are willing and have the trust to ask the questions and to state the thoughts and feelings and opinions that we did. And that's what we were hoping for with this program. That Rabbi John mentioned that we wanted rabbis in different congregations so that more people would come. But the more important reason than that was to say that all of us as a rabbinical community trust our colleagues in our communities to have these conversations. So we don't need to know what our colleagues are saying before they say it to say that these conversations matter. That said, I'm thrilled that you presented tonight because it was a wonderful presentation. But you embodied everything we hoped to embody doing this series. So thank you to all of you for that. And thank you, Rabbi John. And I hope you'll join us. We're about halfway done. We're going to reschedule Rabbi Kopnick, so my math fell apart. But we're close to halfway done.
We're about halfway done, yeah.
We're about halfway done. So I hope to see you again. Thank you for joining us here, and thank you.
Thank you so much. I feel bad that I left a few questions off, but honestly, attention.